It actually comes in a box like this. This is a Meshtastic device. It's really just a little integrated circuit board. This is it right here. Ta-da! Just a little thing. And you have to assemble it. You put a Bluetooth antenna, a regular antenna, and then you hook it up to power, and then all the rest of it we'll talk about in the talk. But these devices let you communicate with each other. So each device sends out radio signals that the other devices pick up, and then you can create this mesh that allows for off-grid communication. And we'll talk about what that all means. So this is kind of the outline of the talk. We will kind of explain more about Meshtastic. Actually, could you turn the light off, the sequined? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. We'll talk about the goals, why we would use Meshtastic and what alternative things could be used instead for those goals. We'll talk about LoRa, which stands for long range, and it's really just a type of radio communication that these devices use. We'll talk about the devices themselves and different antennas and peripherals that you can use with them. And then we will go through some details of how to set the device up. And then we'll have time permitting and people's interest permitting, we will have a little workshop where you guys can set up your own Meshtastic device, and we can create a little mesh network in here just to get a better idea of how it's all done. So that's the plan. So what is Meshtastic? I just showed you. It's basically these little devices here. And as you can see, there's not much to it. So there's really, this bare bones device right here has no way to enter data or receive data. It doesn't have a screen, it doesn't have a keyboard, and so you need to, and the whole purpose of this is to send messages, so you have to be able to see the message and you have to be able to type out the message. So you have to connect it to something. When you have a bare bones one like this, you can connect it to a phone through Bluetooth here, and you can use the phone as your keyboard and as your screen, or you can just, there's 3 ways that you can connect it to a computer, just by plugging it into the USB, through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And then over here you can see some devices actually have a built-in screen and keyboard. So those cost more and they're bigger and they take more energy. But and then what happens is these devices all send signals to each other, and they pass them along until you finally get to your destination. So this is sort of a diagram showing how a mesh network works. So say I'm over here. Picture this across a map of our area. And say I'm over here downtown at Cape Fear Makers Guild, and I want to send a message to a friend over here at UNCW. And however, my little radio only has a range that's this big. So the only other device that I can connect to is this one. But that's okay because if we have a mesh network in place, because then that one passes it to everybody that it can reach, etc., until the message gets passed around and eventually finds its way over to its destination over here. And you can see from this that one of the advantages of this is that some of these nodes can be down and it'll still work. So say this one's down and this one's down, it'll still get there. It'll just go around like that. So it's got some redundancy and it's more stable. It can potentially be more stable that way. So anyway, I'm going to talk about, there are quite a few features of this system. It's off-grid, which means that it's not beholden to, you're not having to pay AT&T or Verizon or Time Warner a monthly fee. They're not going to snoop on what you're doing. And it's not dependent on the internet to work. If something bad were to happen where the internet goes down, these could potentially still work. So it's decentralized, and that's what I was talking about before, where there's no one point which if it fails, the whole system will go down. It's open source, which is nice. It's encrypted, which we'll talk about more later. It has the potential for being long range. It uses very little power, which means that it could be powered by solar quite easily, just a small solar panel. It allows you to send and receive text messages. There's a repeater function, which, so for example, these blue dots could be repeaters, which means that there's no person that is trying to get messages from them. They're just sort of positioned somewhere, and they just are listening and forwarding messages that they get. And so that is useful as well. They have GPS capability, so they can pass along information about where they are, and that's very useful, as you'll see, for mapping out the range of these devices. They can be used to incorporate sensor data. So if you're doing an experiment and you need to gather data out in the field somewhere, a lot of times it's hard to keep that information coming back if it's not, well, you could pay a cell phone company. They have a lot of good coverage, but that gets expensive. So anyway, these devices have, and you'll see again in more detail later, but there's a lot of different sensors that you can attach to them, and then they can sort of chain until they get to a place where there's internet access, and then you can get the data through the internet the rest of the way. Which leads us to the next thing, which is they can tunnel across the internet. Oops.
What does that mean?
The tunneling across the internet? Mm-hmm. So the devices, so if you go to the very first line, or not this line, so both the phone here and this computer here say they have internet access. Then if you receive a message through the Meshtastic software on that device, it can share it on the internet with somebody across the world, you know. So it can pass the message along to people on the internet. So I think one of the ideas of this system is that it can be useful in situations where the internet's not working anymore. So that functionality, it's limited. It's not for every scenario, but it is useful if I'm trying to collect data in the remote wilds of some faraway country, and I just want to chain a few Meshtastic devices that are solar powered until I can get to a big enough village that's got internet, and then I can send it the rest of the way from there to my home, just across the internet, if that makes sense. There's an administrative channel which allows you to, if I set up this whole network, I could, from over here through the administrative channel, I could change the settings of all the network, as long as I have the right password to do so. And it's a good opportunity for learning, and it's a very rapidly developing field. I've been doing this, I should have given the disclaimer at the beginning, I'm no expert on this. I just started doing this about 4 months ago, and I haven't actually had a whole lot of time in the last 4 months to work on it. But it's been amazing just to see from month to month how much things change in the realm of this, and I'll talk more about that later too. So, how does it work? As I mentioned before, it uses long range. It's called LoRa, and it stands for long range, and it's a proprietary radio communication protocol that uses very low power, but that allows it to go further, and it can't convey a whole lot of information at once. So that's why these are using messages. They're just passing like text messages back and forth. I've seen people trying to experiment with this and add like voice capability and stuff like that, but I don't know how good it'll be at that, just because it is low bandwidth, so it has very low data transfer capabilities. But it's amazing what you can do with that. It is at the 915 megahertz frequency in the United States, and different regions have different frequencies that they use. There's no need you don't have to be a ham radio operator or have a license or certification to do this. And then we already talked about how they form a mesh by passing messages. So the 900 megahertz frequency, if you go by the bands, it's 33 centimeters. It's considered both microwave and ultra high frequency bands. Let's see here. It is one of the frequencies allocated to ham radio users. And if you have an amateur radio license, you can use these devices a little bit differently. You can use more power, up to 10 watts. Usually it's 1 watt a limit. And you can use higher gain antennas, but you have to follow the rules of ham radio, which are that you can never encrypt anything, and you must announce your call sign every 10 minutes while transmitting. And I think that those last 2 restrictions are enough that there's no point in doing it. You may as well just use ham radios then. Yes?
Is it the power usage or like the band that you're using that dictates if you need a license or not?
Well, if you wanted to use these devices at higher power, up to 10 watts, you'd have to get a ham radio license. And then you'd have to not encrypt, and you'd have to announce your call sign every 10 minutes while broadcasting. So, does that answer your question?
It does, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because they're all the same band. They're all the same radio frequency, which is an amateur radio frequency. It's actually, well, we'll talk about it. Actually, that's the next thing. Is a lot of things use this frequency. This is used by old cordless phones, baby monitors, garage door openers, you name it. A lot of things use this frequency. It's very popular. So there's a lot of potential for interference from other devices.
But so the interference would be still limited because there is not a wide coverage. So if you're in a region that is clear from all devices or whatever, you should be okay.
Absolutely, right. And I don't know if I mentioned it yet, if you have direct line of sight between your transmitter and receiver, there's a potential of going very far. There's records set of like 190 kilometers or something. I think that's unusually far, but yeah.
I was curious about that because I looked on the website earlier.
Mm-hmm.
They put it on top of a mountain range.
Yeah, right, yeah. So you get really good line of sight. Yeah, there's no mountains here to do that. So, I'll show you in a little bit, but downtown, it's really blocked by the buildings. And even though we don't have skyscrapers or anything, it's blocked from the lack of line of sight. So there is some effect from environmental conditions, and then also summer versus winter. When there are more leaves on the trees, there's more potential for blocking the signal.
Talk to the local government about putting one on top of the Thermo Fisher building after they're all done moving in there.
Yeah, we could. Good potential.
Tallest building in there,
Yeah. I think I'll skip the multi-path interference. There's just one more thing that can screw up reception. So for you, the people that were at the electroplating talk, I like to always kind of go back to basics. For that one, I had the periodic table of the elements. For this one, I got the electromagnetic spectrum. And so just to kind of put things in perspective of what we're dealing with here, and I think it's, I actually looked at a lot of different diagrams online and chose this one. Although I don't like that this is too wide. The amount of light that you can actually see is a really very narrow range in the whole scheme of things. I think that's just cool to keep in mind. What we can see is just a tiny, tiny fraction of what's going on out there. So, and I don't know how much you know about the electromagnetic spectrum, but over here we've got the high energy gamma rays and X-rays, and then this is ultraviolet, causes sunburns. You can see that. This is heat. And then microwaves, it's not just what you use in the microwave oven, it's also used to send signals. And actually what we're dealing with, Meshtastic, is about 10 to the 9. So it's right about here, the wavelength that we're using. And the radio waves can just keep on getting more and more longer. Here is a diagram showing how the United States allocates all that radio spectrum that I just showed you. And as the point of this is that there's a lot going on here. And these big chunks here are like broadcast radio and television. And the little green specks, dark green, like right here, actually this is the Meshtastic range that we're using. That's allocated to hobbyists and people like us. There's a couple of green little stripes, but they're pretty infrequent. The government actually auctions off these frequencies periodically. And I had ChatGPT figure it out for me, and it says that in the last 10 years, the United States earned about 13 billion a year from auctioning off wavelengths, and so it's a big business. But anyway, point of this is that we only have a very little narrow spectrum that we're allowed to use. Okay, so feel free to ask questions, by the way, if I'm not making sense, or if you have anything you want elaborated on. There are a lot of other ways to do things. You know, if you're looking to send information from one place to another and you don't want to sign up to AT&T to do it, there's a lot of creative things out there. I think AirTags are interesting. Those are the little devices made by Apple that you can use to locate, you know, pets or anything, your purse or whatever, if it goes missing. I think it's interesting because it's making use of the fact that there are just Apple phones all over this country. And so it just reports to any Apple phone that's near it, and then the Apple phone reports back to a central online cloud and logs the location of that device. That's kind of interesting. The helium, I don't know if you guys heard of helium miners at all? Anybody here? Yeah. So helium is, it was very popular 4 years ago when the crypto boom was happening. It's similar, it's quite similar to Meshtastic. It uses the same frequency, it uses LoRa, little electronic devices, and it sends out a signal that other things can, it creates a mesh network where information can be exchanged. And people were incentivized to create this mesh network or participate in this mesh network. They were rewarded with cryptocurrency, helium cryptocurrency. And the more coverage you had and the more reliable signal you had, the more crypto coins you were rewarded with. And just by keeping it up, you earned coins. And back about 4 years ago, it was actually kind of lucrative. And then there was the big crash, and it hasn't been lucrative since. But it was kind of cool because it incentivized people to create this network, which popped up very quickly across the country. And then the companies paid the helium system to use that service of this network that had. So, for example, those little scooters that, thankfully we don't have them in Wilmington, but they're in other big cities like Atlanta. Those little scooters that go around, they have to report back, you know, like who's using them, what credit card, you know, when their battery's low, or various bits of information have to be reported back centrally. And it was very inexpensive for them to just use a low energy system like this, a helium system. Same with parking meters, they have to be connected to a central hub. And so a lot of things like that where I think still are using the helium network. There's these next two are things that basically have gone military. Let's see, let me call up one of these here. They're basically what we have, but way more expensive, and they sell them to the military. So here's, which one is this? GoTenna, and they're not even going to tell you how much this is going to cost. You have to speak to a representative. But you can, you know, staple a bunch of these to trees, and then you can get the kit with the little radios. They look pretty nice, and it basically is exactly the same thing as what we're doing. And the things that you're stapling to the trees are like the relays that just pass the signals back and forth. And
it still uses the same radio frequency?
Yeah,
okay.
It does. Actually, this one here, they have a price on this one. This is $2,500, and that's for just one of these little radios. And here you can, if you want, you can get a pack of 10 of them for $25,000. Yeah, I mean, why not? And if you look at the specs, I was astounded. This is exactly the same specs as the little things that I've got sitting right here in front of me. Same frequencies, 6 hops. I think these can do more than 6 hops, and at 1 watt. So anyway, it's the same sort of thing. But you know, they're just more sturdy. They can survive the field and whatever. They're, I'm sure, been tested up the wazoo.
And probably warranty and all those things.
Yeah, yeah. So interestingly, you know, I like to read science fiction. We have a science fiction book club. in the last 2 months, I read 2 different stories that they were exploring or invading a remote land, and before they went in, the military, these are futuristic scenarios, the military dropped just these mesh radios all over so that the invading troops could communicate. It just seems kind of interesting that happened.
Wouldn't knowing the frequency that the enemy is using make it easier
To block.
yeah.
Yeah, it would, totally. But because it's sort of short range, they'd have to block it frequently, you know? They'd have to,
A mesh network.
yeah. They'd have to drop their own carpet of,
Anti-mesh
yeah, yeah, which could definitely be blocked. Absolutely, it is quite possible.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a microchip anywhere in any of that stuff?
Yeah. By microchip, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, there is. So if there was an electromagnetic pulse, they would go up.
Right,
So they would be termed useless because not.
right.
Okay, so.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah, and what I learned actually last year was that, so there's 2 types of electromagnetic pulses. I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but so one is from launching or detonation of a nuclear bomb just above the atmosphere, and that one takes out all these little guys. Whereas one caused by a coronal mass ejection that hits the Earth from the sun, you know, that one only takes out long power lines. It causes surges across long power lines. So it would destroy the electrical grid, but it wouldn't destroy the microcircuitry.
But the EMP would.
Yeah, the nuclear bomb above the atmosphere would.
The next question is they are ultimately reliant, when I was looking online, when you set this up, you have to go onto your computer, download the data source, or connect in, correct? So when you have these little walkie-talkies,
Mm-hmm.
like, there's no text. Do you need your phone? What's the point of having that
Right.
with your phone? like, it's
Well,
like,
say you have like a hurricane and the cell networks
or down.
well down or
If you want to pass that around.
everybody's trying to make a phone call, right? And they're
There's priorities, yeah.
yeah.
So
But-
in that scenario, if regular communications are down because of natural disaster or anything like that, then you can still use those devices that will still work,
But
very
how do
likely.
you communicate? Like, there's no text if you don't have your phone,
There's like
correct?
put out
Your
devices
phone,
you can
your
have.
phone may still work.
Oh, this.
Your
Okay.
phone may still
Yeah,
work if you have power.
Yeah.
You just need to connect your phone to the device.
Bluetooth, right? So it doesn't
So-
need to connect cellular
Okay,
to the
okay.
device.
So yeah.
Can you hardwire connect your phone to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right. If you're concerned, if you're trying to prep for a nuclear bomb going off above the atmosphere, that one you need to have a bag, a Faraday bag, and just keep everything in there, and maybe a spare cell phone and some of these devices, and so
It will still work after.
yeah.
It will not start after the event, but
Right, yeah.
after the event, if you redeploy equipment that has not been damaged,
Right.
you're good to go.
Yeah, to protect them, you'd need a Faraday cage, all that
Yeah.
stuff. Good question, excellent question. Oh. So, let's see, what was I talking about last? Oh, I didn't finish that. So there's also, there's other things, but I think that the thing that we need to compare this to are, is this more or less useful than the easy to obtain CB, radio, walkie-talkies, those sort of things? Because in an emergency, you can use those, right? You can just pull out a walkie-talkie and probably get the same range. You know, some of these, there's different bands. So like the CB is a lower frequency and it has a higher range. But there's basically 3 different types of compact radio that you can get that use publicly free, of, you know, like amateur, open to the public frequencies. One of the rules that they teach you when you get a ham radio license is that if it's an emergency, then you can just do whatever. You don't have to restrict yourself to their frequency. You can do whatever it takes to communicate. So that's good to know too. But so anyway, this is kind of the gold standard. Is this better or worse than just a walkie-talkie? And we'll see. Kind of depends what you're doing exactly. But we'll see. And these aren't expensive is the other point. You can get a few walkie-talkies pretty cheap. All right. Encryption, this is kind of interesting because no other thing that I know of allows legal encryption in the amateur radio bands. This is an exception. Now, if you go try to buy some of those walkie-talkies I was just showing you on the last page, you go to Amazon, they'll make it sound like they're encrypted. They talk about privacy codes and secure communication and all this stuff. They use all those buzzwords, but it turns out that it's just like it has a signal that it includes, and then the other guy will only turn on if it hears that signal. But if you have a radio that's just listening to all signals, you'll still hear it. Yeah. So it's not at all private. You can eavesdrop on everybody else's signal very easily. But what's to stop you from using a cipher or a code? Okay, some of the Meshtastic devices. This is the first one I showed you here. And this is the one we'll be playing with. It's the least expensive one. Anyway, I'll post all this. If we do get it on YouTube, I'll post it on there. So there's got links for all this stuff. I just passed around this T-Deck, which has both a screen and a keyboard, so you don't have to worry about linking it with any other computer. This one has a screen, but they cost more. All right, accessories. You can combine these with different antennas. One thing I had to learn, and it was kind of painful, is that there's all these different connectors for antennas. The chip has a teeny little thing to connect the antenna to, and that is called an IPEX connector. And this is an example of an antenna that uses an IPEX connector. But then up here, there's all these there's standardized radio antenna connectors, but there's that's a female with a female, and that's a female with a male, and this is a female with a female. They're very confusing. But anyway, as long as you know there are the 4 possibilities. I was trying to connect something just today, and I'm like, I don't have you got to have all those different connectors. Anyway.
You can buy adapters for those.
Yeah.
They're really cheap, and you can just pay anything you want.
Yeah.
And they still work.
I bought a kit of various adapters, and I still didn't have the thing I needed today. So I needed a female on each end. No. Anyway. You get solar panels that would power this for about $13. You can get a battery. Actually, I was going to ask you, Hardik, for this sort of battery, would you need a special circuitry to charge it?
A lot of those devices have that built into it.
The chip?
Yeah, those things have a charger built into it.
Hmm.
So plug USB into it, and it'll charge the battery for you.
Yeah. I didn't experiment with the batteries and the solar, but that is definitely the next step. All right. So antennas. I think antennas are important to extending the range of the thing. The first batch of these little guys that I bought just came with a little wire that long. That was the antenna. And then the second batch I bought, they upgraded it to a better antenna. I don't know if you guys know, though, that antennas can be very finicky. I don't know if you're all old enough to go back to the days where TVs had antennas, and you would have bad reception, and you fiddle with the antenna, and you get it just right. Finally, you can see something, and then as soon as you walk away, it's gone. And that's because you being there actually affects the performance of that antenna. And the same happens with all these things. So it turns out there's this cool little device here, which, extra credit if you want, I can show you how to use it. But it analyzes the antenna. So it'll actually show you when, if you put it in this slightly different position, will it be better or worse? If you touch it, will it be better or worse? There's these antennas that bend, and it turns out that if you bend it as intended, it totally changes the frequency that it's transmitting at. And you don't know that unless you don't get the instant feedback of seeing your TV signal come and go. So you wouldn't know unless you analyzed it somehow. That's why we've got this cool little antenna analyzer. We got this thing. And this is just to show me how to use it if I come back to it. So I mentioned there's sensors that you can attach to this. They're compatible with this little guy. And there's, just on this one Rack Wireless website, there's a whole ton of them. All different things that you can connect. They range, I think, from like $3 to $30, but it's kind of cool. All right, so the software that runs this, you download the latest version from Meshtastic, and actually the latest batch of these I got were pre-flashed, but I didn't trust it, so I flashed it because who knows which version they flashed it with. So basically you get this, you flash the software on there, and we'll go through all that. And then, but here's some details about it. Each device, like as you can see up here, each device can only be paired with one thing by Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Once it receives a message, it tries to transmit it up to 3 times. If it gets a message, where is that? It checks to see if it's heard that message before. If so, it ignores it and doesn't try to rebroadcast it, so it doesn't just keep doing a loop through the mesh. And then you can set a hop limit, how many times each device will forward a message, and it just kind of counts down. And then most of these devices also will store messages, or each of these devices will store messages so that when you get connected later, it'll tell you what you missed. Oops. All right, so when you get them, and we'll go through this, you assemble the device, put on the Bluetooth and long-range antennas. Every place warned this. It said, do not power it up until that long-range antenna is on there, because you can fry the circuitry if you power it up without the antenna on there.